One of the memories I have of growing up on a farm near Beeman, about 45 miles south of here, is the artesian well on the farm. The well there on our family farm has enough pressure deep in the earth that at regular intervals, water just gushes out of a large hose that is near the outside faucet. And I recall very well as a child on a July day being absolutely parched and standing around that outside faucet, and we only had one long-handled tin cup at the faucet. And so whoever was standing there for a drink filled that cup to overflowing and then drank that clear, sweet, satisfying water. And I remember how it would run down my chin, and how even though it was incredibly ordinary and everyday, it was also life-giving. And the people that would gather around that source of water would sometimes be members of my family. Sometimes it was friends who were over to play. Sometimes it was my dad and the hired man who'd been working together and were hot and sweaty. And sometimes it was the men who were over to bale hay. And whoever it was that would gather around that tin dipper would just get passed from person to person, and we would drink together. And in a way that I can't pick out any particular day, but over and over and over, that experience came to shape my understanding of what it meant to be family and community. Sharing that water with people that I saw on Sunday morning at church, and that water with people who never walked through the doors of the church ever. But we around that water were community, and we drank deeply. The Hebrew people were thirsty. They had left the slavery of Egypt under the leadership of Moses, and God traveled with them each step of the way. And now they were journeying in the wilderness of sin, and that word sin, well, kind of catches my attention. Because they're complaining, and they are quarreling, and, well, sin means separation from God. And it seems like the sin that always underlies every other sin is a self-preoccupation. It comes naturally to us as human beings. Think about what you know about child development. An infant, a toddler, they begin to develop a sense of self, a sense of their own needs, their own wants, their own desires. And an infant and toddler can be pretty vocal about getting what they need. For all of us, the challenge as we grow is to slowly, over time, step by step, day by day, become less self-preoccupied, less self-focused, so that as adults, we're not quite throwing the same kind of temper tantrums that infants and toddlers do, and it's a bit of a challenge. Thomas Keating says that self-centeredness, that way that we are enculturated, is a false self, and it is very easy to go through life completely self-centered, completely living out a false self. That's what the Hebrew people are doing, as they are so completely focused on themselves, their own needs, their own desires. And if we were to read this story in the original Hebrew, we would see that in their quarreling and in their complaining, they have literally put God on trial. They have become the judge, the jury, and the prosecuting attorney, which is what happens when we are so focused on our own needs. And they and we have declared God guilty. Guilty of not being present, guilty of, at the minimum, neglect, and at the maximum, abuse, guilty of not meeting our expectations and our demands. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Surely I'm not the only one that's ever put God on trial here. Surely I'm not the only one who has been a little self-focused and self-preoccupied. But this is what happens when we do that. We hit an obstacle. We stop moving. On this journey of life, on this journey toward God, and this journey of growing in our faith, maturing in our faith, we come to a screeching halt. And our growth is stunted, and we dry up. We start to look like this. Now, I pulled this out last night at Saturday worship, and Jeff goes, "My plant!" Yeah, it's seen better days. I don't know how many of you had this experience, but Thursday I was going home for lunch, and I got to the turn on Forest Drive, and there were big pieces of highway equipment that were working there, and there was no way I was turning down Forest Drive to go home. They were obstacles in my path. Jeff and I live on a dead end. I don't know what it means that your pastors live on a dead end, but there was no other way to get there. There were simply obstacles to my journey, obstacles in my way. When we hit a point that we are completely self-centered, when we hit a point where we have God on trial, where we are showing up at worship only when it's convenient for us, when we operate out of the idea that an 8th grade education in our faith is enough and we graduate at confirmation, when we give to God in time and talent and treasure out of our leftovers, which usually ain't much, those are those times that we hit an obstacle on our journey of faith. We stop growing and we dry up. And God hears the cries of the Hebrews, and God hears our cries. And God has put into place a way to keep us on the journey, a way to keep us moving forward, a way to continue to help us drink deeply of the living waters of Jesus Christ. But it's not about the words we say. Our gospel reading makes it clear to us that we can say anything we want, and it doesn't really make that much difference. It's about what we do. And so our reading from Exodus gives us some insight into these practices, these actions, these things that we do to keep us moving forward on the journey. And the first is this. Did you hear all the questions that came in our story today? Moses is going, why, what? The people of God are going, why, where is God? Typically, we are told that to question is indicative of a lack of faith. But I would say to you this morning that our questions are the ants in the pants of faith. They propel us forward deeper on the journey and deeper into a relationship with God. Do the answers show up immediately? No. But part of the doing, part of the practice, part of the action of faith is to continue on the journey with our questions, to live with the questions, and to watch closely for the surprising ways that God may answer them. Moses called out questions, and God met Moses exactly where he was, and yet God loved Moses and the Hebrew people far too much to leave them there. Were you listening to what happened? God said, go, and I will be waiting for you. This journey of faith that we are called on, this process of growth, God says to us, go. I am with you wherever you are on the journey, but I love you too much to leave you there. Go. Keep moving forward. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep showing up. Keep practicing. Keep doing. But go, and I will be waiting for you there. You see, it is about showing up. Time after time. Trusting that God will meet us there. Woody Allen said 90% of life is showing up. That's what this journey of faith is. As we show up to worship together, as we show up in small groups to learn and grow together, as we show up to pray and to study the Bible, as we show up and share generously of our time and our talent and our treasure, one step at a time, going forward in stages in exactly the way that the Hebrew people were doing. And as we show up over time, we discover that God brings something entirely unexpected, entirely surprising from an unexpected source. The Hebrew people received water from a rock. In time, one step at a time, over time, showing up. God changes our questions into insight. God changes our self-centeredness, our self-preoccupation into a deeper centering in God, a deeper centering in love of God and neighbor. You see, my friends, we worship the God of transformation, a God who brings water from a rock and life from death, and a God who brings growth from you and me. John Wesley said that God's sanctifying grace is at work in our lives to grow us into the people that God created us to be. Paul says these are the ways that God is working within us. Hildegard of Bingen, a medieval Christian mystic, said that God is at work greening us, greening our souls, greening us, growing us in the way that God created us to be. I got it. So that we start to look like this. You see, as we continue to practice, as we continue to show up, we become filled to overflowing with the living water of Jesus Christ, drawing on deep reservoirs of God's water so that it gushes forth from us into the lives of others. Ordinary and everyday, yes, but life-giving and satisfying, filling the thirst of the parched people and places in our church and in our community. And God calls us to practice. God calls us to show up. And then God rolls up those holy sleeves and does the rest. Amen.